First, welcome to this great event. I'm Bruce Kogan. I direct, along with Olivia Schum, the Bernstein Center, the Sanford C. Bernstein Center for Leadership and Ethics. And Shirley, did she just walk out? Helps us too on these events. So I have a little bit of a task. Olivia gave me a task of things to do. There's also the standard thing as well. Nice to thank, first of all, the Klion family for their generous gift to the center and to the school for this event, which happens every year. If you had a chance to go online, you see the speakers we've had earlier. They're impressive speakers, and tonight stands in this tradition and in this line. The Annual Klion Forum event was a gift made now some years ago in honor of Annual Klion, but also the family at large, because of his great dedication to the meaning of ethics. He was a long time in Pete Warwick. He made his reputation there. He's taught at the school. Felt a lot very strongly about the business school, and we're happy to have honored the name attached to this particular event itself. We also have members of the family I said earlier, which I hope we have a chance to meet. Over the past year, we did lose Janet Klion, which was deeply involved with us. We happily have a number of family members here. If you want to stand up, just wave your hand. If you want to do I also want to thank, we have a very active student board. I think this year we have an incredibly active student board. I don't know if Alex is here in the room. Or
he's outside.
He's outside working now. Yes. And so all these events take place because of student involvement. You probably all know that, but we couldn't do anything without their help. And also, we're lucky to have the support of alumni and faculty, many who are present here today. I'm told, this is a new task for me, that I'm supposed to say something in addition. So they write it out for me. Surprise, a little bell will go off too on the whole thing. But we are a new team, so they quickly learned I need these behavioral prompts here. So we are going to give out autographed copies of the panelists' books. This is Jim Rogers' book, Lighting the World, Transforming Our Energy by Bringing Electricity to Everyone, and Geoff Heal's Endangered Economies, How the Neglect of Nature Threatens Our Prosperity. I was asked earlier whether or not we shouldn't do something more political this time of year. We're living in, you don't have to do that as long as everything you eat from the granola in the morning to your eggs or to your anything. It's always a discussion about politics. But we're not unaware that energy, climate change, is a topic of greater importance because it's contested more at the highest places of government than has been in the past. That's one of the reasons we're so excited and so happy to have this background too. We are going to give away these books to people who tweet or post the most on their own media channels, utilizing the event hashtag #Klion Forum. That's one word. And the post must contain, this is one of 3 books, you can take notes for it. The post must contain the hashtag in order to be included in the contest, and we will announce the lucky recipients at the end of the event. Now, I'm not going to do the introductions of the 2 amazing authors, but I will say something quick about Elke Weber, who's a colleague of mine, still a colleague of mine in this college, and she has been a leader, particularly in the areas of risk assessment, behavioral understandings of risk involving the environment, and including, of course, climate change as well. She was here for 17 years. She taught many classes also in psychology. She has one of these, CDs you blink at. But she left for the far south. I understand the place is called Princeton. How far south Jim is somewhere come from, but we'll discuss that. And it's kind enough for her to come to lead this issue. But she's the right person to have this discussion, and I'm happy to pass the microphone to her. Thanks very much.
I
Good.
you drop that mic.
Not in my script.
So we'll start off with two short presentations by our two speakers, and then we go into some questions we quickly discuss among ourselves, and then at 7:40 we'll open the floor to questions from the audience. But let me sort of first of all introduce Geoff, and then I'll introduce Jim, and then we'll see. So Geoff Heal has thought about the environment for a long time. So his career actually as an environmental and resource economist, and has thought about what's needed to make economic activity and economic development sustainable. He is the Donald Waite Professor of Social Enterprise here at Columbia Business School. His bachelor and doctorate are from Cambridge University in the UK. It's a real Cambridge. And also an honorary doctorate from the Université de Paris Dauphine. He's the author of 18 books. We just heard about his latest tonight. And about 200 articles. He's a member of the National Academy of Sciences, a fellow of the Econometric Society, past president and of the Association for Environmental and Resource Economics, director of the Union of Concerned Scientists, a founder, director, and chairman of the board of the Coalition of Rainforest Nations, which we should definitely ask about, and is on the Economic Advisory Board for the Environmental Defense Fund. He's chaired a number of committees at the National Academy of Sciences. He was a commissioner at the Pew's Ocean Commission. We actually were joint IPCC fellows. At the last assessment report, he was a coordinating lead author for a chapter in 3 on mitigation. And yeah, there are many, many honors I'm not going to spend the time filling up the space with. But we'll talk about his most recent book, Endangered Economies, as Bruce already mentioned, how the neglect of nature threatens our prosperity. Maybe we should just let it go, but I also should say it's not just a book about the environment and how to conserve it, but also a nice autobiography of sorts. It's quite moving. It's a moving account of his voyage from academic theoretical contributions to the questions of various sustainability to the diagnosis of interventions and an active involvement in actually putting those to use. He's somebody who clearly believes in the power of market forces, but also favorably quotes Marx in this book. He says the point is not merely to understand the world, but to change it for the better. And I should say he and I and a couple of other colleagues recently created a course here at Columbia on the business of climate change, where we're still trying to put all of this together. So Geoff, take it away.
Thank you, Elke. So it's a real pleasure to be here. My IFL, the team when I got here, was used to say, quick while you're ahead. Maybe I should stop right now. I got applause. So what I'm going to do is use the first 6 or 7 minutes just to give a real high-level summary of some of the points I talked about in this book, because they set a kind of intellectual framework for thinking about what the Trump administration is doing on environmental policies and energy policies and funds. So I'm going to keep it there. I'll summarize it very quickly and go into things in more detail later on if necessary. There's really 3 or 4 points I try to make in this book. The first point is that environmental conservation is essential to prosperity. If that's the only point people take away from the book, I would be very happy with just that. That is in strong contradiction, for example, to President Trump's frequent assertions that environmental regulations kill jobs. The kind of popular right-wing perspective on environmental conservation is that it clashes with economic progress. So what are my main points of the book is it doesn't. And I'll try to explain very quickly in a second why it is. Second point that I make in the book is that there are some apparent conflicts between environmental conservation and economic progress. And those apparent conflicts almost always arise from what we economists call market failures. Anybody who's taken a course in economics here will know what a market failure is. It's a case of external effects, external costs, public goods, common property resources with inadequately defined property rights and so on. And there are standards of those. So, second point then, conflicts between progress and conservation always arise because of these failures of the market. Third point is these failures of the market are really quite easy to correct. Any economics textbook catalogues these so-called market failures, and it tells you how to fix them. We've known how to fix them for 50 odd years now. So it's not sort of rocket science to fix these market failures and resolve these apparent contradictions when they arise. So that's the second point. This leads you naturally into thinking about sustainability. because sustainability really refers to a situation where there aren't any conflicts between economic progress and environmental conservation. And there are other things in sustainability as well. That's certainly an important part of what one might mean by sustainability. If you make those observations, then they lead naturally to the question, okay, if it's relatively easy to make environmental conservation consistent with economic progress, why haven't we done so? What are the obstacles? And I'm arguing the obstacles are not economic, and they're not technological. We have all the technologies we want to resolve problems like climate change, for example, but they're almost entirely political and psychological. So let me just go through a couple of those points really quickly, and then I'll run out of my 6 minutes. Sure, yes. So the first point I made was that conservation is essential to prosperity. The book documents that at some length, but let me just give a... Oh, raise the mic. How's that? Any different? Okay, great. Okay, so the first point I make is that conservation is essential to prosperity. So let me just give you 2 kind of quick perspectives on that. One rather cheap perspective is the following. Think of the richest countries in the world. Scandinavia and Switzerland, basically. Think of the countries which have the cleanest environments in the world. Ditto, right? And we all know, we've all done enough statistics to know that correlation doesn't prove causation. But it does prove that if A and B are correlated, it does prove that B doesn't prevent A. In other words, it does prove that Trump is wrong. It does prove that there isn't a conflict between the two. But it doesn't necessarily prove causation. At a slightly a different level, another way of thinking about this is, why does conservation matter? Well, why does conservation of the environment matter? Well, at a very high level, we are all part of the environment. Conservation of the environment is actually conservation of us, which is very important. Conservation, we're part of the environment because we evolved from the biological environment, the biosphere as biologists call it. We actually still have an intimate relationship with that and are very dependent on it in a whole range of ways. One of the main things I try to do in the book is spell out that dependence and its economic implications. And pretty much every day, papers cross my desk, or at least cross my screen, I guess, these days, on the issue of the relationship between pollution and health. And it's obvious that air pollution at the scale which you see this in China or India today is bad for people's health. You can't have a prosperous, healthy society that's as polluted as Beijing or New Delhi. And the same thing is true with water. I guess everybody here knows that one of the principal causes of intestinal diseases in developing countries, which are a major cause of infant death, is polluted water. So clearly, polluted water and polluted air contribute to ill health. But that's not just in developing countries. There's a huge range of studies that have shown that even trace pollutants in this country have quite a profound impact on people's health, on infant development. For example, exposure of pregnant women to a wide range of trace pollutants can affect the development of the fetus many years afterwards. There's a lot of work going on this, showing that our health really is intimately affected in a whole range of somewhat unexpected ways by exposure to pollution of one sort or another. So that's why ultimately there is really no conflict, but it's essential to have a clean environment if we're going to have a prosperous and healthy society. Let me just make one more point, and then I'll stop. As I said, the conflicts between environment and progress arise from examples of cases of market failures. Let me give you the poster child for that. What a lot of people see a conflict between economic progress and pollution, because we know that if countries like India and China are going to develop, this is what Jim discusses in his book, then they're going to need a lot more energy. And if the energy is generated through business as usual, that will mean a lot more pollution, a lot more use of fossil fuels, a lot more pollution. Let's just think for a second what's going on in that case. You can produce energy from coal, so electric energy from coal, from gas, or from renewable sources. The cost of energy from coal here in the US is around about 7 cents a kilowatt hour. The cost of energy from gas is around about 5 cents a kilowatt hour, using combined cycle gas turbines, which is why incidentally gas is driving out coal. The cost of energy from wind is anywhere from 2.5 cents to about 7 or 8 cents, depending on how windy the area is. And from solar is anywhere from about 3.5 cents to 7 or 8 cents, depending on how far south or north you are. So coal is at the top end of that list of costs still. But that's just the private costs of using coal. If you try to We all know that using coal has a lot of side effects. It pollutes the atmosphere, affects people's health, it affects the climate. And burning coal is one of the biggest sources of greenhouse gases in the world. And our coal-fired power station burns 10,000 tons of coal every day. Every ton of coal produces 2.5 tons of CO2. That's 25,000 tons of CO2 a day. That's 7.5 million tons of CO2 a year. Replicate that thousands and thousands of times over around the world, and you can see where the billions of tons of CO2 come from very, very quickly. Okay? So, there's a lot of external costs associated with using coal. Now, what correcting external costs involves is actually bringing those external costs back to the users of coal, charging them for the external costs as well as the internal costs that they generate. If you were to charge the people who burn coal for all of the external costs they generate, the cost of coal-fired electricity would go up from 7 cents a kilowatt hour to between 15 and 25 cents a kilowatt hour. And there's a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences by a bunch of guys from Harvard Public Health that came up with those numbers a couple of years back. So if you were to internalize the externalities associated with the use of coal, coal would be priced right out of the market and would never be used under any circumstances at all. Gas would be priced at the very top end of the market. It might still be used in some situations, but it would become a lot more expensive. Whereas obviously wind and solar would remain roughly where they are today, because there are far fewer external costs associated with it. So, the fact that economic growth, which is associated with energy use, is associated with pollution, really arises entirely from an uninternalized externality, to put in horrible economic jargon, from a failure to charge people the full costs of their actions, to put it in more intuitive terms. The European Union talks about the polluter pays principle, and that's really what's missing in this case. The polluter pays principle, I think, is a nice way of putting it together. Now, let me stop at that point. Those are some of the main points that I'm trying to get across.
Thanks so much, Geoff. Let's talk for a second about electricity. It plays a really fundamental role in our lives, but just like oxygen, we don't realize how fundamental until somebody cuts off the tap. But we need electricity for most of our components to well-being, whether it's personal safety, good health, education, reading at night, and almost all types of commerce, especially in this highly interconnected space we're living in. And yet, 1.2 billion people on this planet do not have access to electricity, and another billion has very limited access. So Jim Rogers will tell us how we can transform our energy future to bring electricity to everyone on our planet. In the process, also transform our own energy systems. There probably are many lessons in that story of replacing aging infrastructures in this country and to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels with environmentally friendly and sustainable sources of electricity. So who is this Jim Rogers? He's the, who is? I put my glasses on for that. He's the former CEO and chairman of Duke Energy, the largest electrical power company in the US. In 2009, Newsweek named him one of the 50 most powerful people in the world. He's an expert commentator, has appeared on 60 Minutes, Bloomberg News, CNBC, MSNBC, and the Colbert Report, which impresses me.
That's good.
That's my greatest distinction.
He's also spoken at the Aspen Institute, the UN, the World Economic Forum, and he served on the boards of 8 Fortune 500 companies. He lives in Charlotte, North Carolina, and actually is currently a senior partner at Stone Peak Infrastructure Partners and also a visiting professor of practice at Duke University, where he teaches a graduate seminar entitled Renewables and the World's Poor. He currently serves on the board of the Center for Global Energy Policy here at Columbia University. Thank you. Many other groups, including the Aspen Institute, the Nature Conservancy, and the Bloomberg New Energy Finance. He's a co-founder of the Global Bright Light Foundation, which delivers solar-powered lanterns capable of charging cell phones to rural communities around the world. So Jim, tell us a little bit about your amazing work.
Thank you very much. First of all, I am delighted to be here with y'all tonight. And it's an honor for me to be talking about my book sitting next to Geoff. I love Geoff's book. It's a terrific book, and I would urge all of you to read it because it really helps frame the way to think about the future and the changes that we really need to make to have a sustainable economy going forward. You might wonder why a guy who's the CEO for 25 years in the power sector, the first thing he does when he retires is he turns and focuses on the 1.2 billion with no access to electricity. Most people thought when I wrote the book I would simply say, it's simple. Just extend the grid to all these remote areas around the world, connect them all up, and it'll be all good. That wasn't the conclusion that I reached as I did the analysis and thought about it. It became clear to me that with the falling price of solar and looking at some of the impediments of extending the grid, we'll talk more about that. I need to make sure I do 6 minutes. I just looked up. It's pretty clear that the best answer may be distributed solar generation in remote areas. It's affordable, it's scalable, and even though I didn't talk about it in the book because I didn't want it to be another climate book, it really has 0 carbon emissions. Now, why is that really important? The International Energy Agency, when they looked at where the growth in carbon is going to come in the future in the world, 85% of it is going to come from the low-income countries. It's going to come from sub-Saharan Africa. It's going to come from India, parts of Latin America, Indonesia, Pakistan. It's going to come from those areas. So the question is, if you have 1.2 billion with no access, let me put that in kind of a more specific way. That's 630 million people in sub-Saharan Africa, 300 million in India, a couple hundred million in Indonesia. So the question really is, and those are the big numbers, another way to look at the numbers, because numbers for me define the problem. There's 1 billion people in sub-Saharan Africa that go to medical clinics with no lights. If y'all been to a doctor lately, if you think about all the things that happen, whether it's x-rays, MRIs, laser surgery, everything is really driven by electricity. And there's a billion people that go to medical clinics without it. If you think about the fact that 50% of the people that go to primary schools go to schools without electricity. And so you recognize that how can they have the economic growth and development to really lift people from poverty. And I have a point of view in the book. I believe access to electricity is a basic human right. Just like water. We have difficulty thinking about electricity as the missing ingredient in these economies around the world because it's so ubiquitous in the US and other high-income countries around the world. And actually, if you read a lot of the books about lifting people from poverty and medical issues, etc., none of them ever mention electricity, even though the medical clinics and the schools have no electricity. It's a blind spot for people in high-income countries. So what I tried to do is focus on what are the impact. Why is it there's still 1.2 billion? And actually, you know what the experts are saying? We're going so slow in sub-Saharan Africa. The population is growing so fast. We have 630 million with no access today. In 2030, we'll have 630 million with no access. So we're not really making any progress. So the question is, how do we accelerate it? That's really the challenge. But there are a lot of impediments. And I spent a lot of time on the impediments. Impediments is one, government. Governments don't always like to see the lights turned on for everybody in their country. And there's political reasons for that. And I kind of minimize that in the book. But I recognize governments make it difficult because they put tariff on solar equipment. They put tariff on other inverters and other equipment to help the build out. And then governments, quite frankly, all the utilities in those countries are state-owned. So they're not crystal clear that they want to extend electricity to everybody. So there's a government issue, and I go into some detail on that. But the second issue is really the availability of capital, which is a problem for all these low-income countries, but specifically with respect to electricity. And what does that mean? That means while there's the World Bank focused on this, the development banks focused on this, but guess what they're focused on? They're focused on building big coal plants, big gas plants. They're not really focused on deploying renewables in these remote areas. If you talk to leadership in these countries, they say, we want first world power. What does first world power mean? It It means a big central station coal plant. It means a big gas plant. And what they don't realize is that 21st century power is distributed solar. And so they can leapfrog in these rural areas over having to build out these huge plants. So there's a lot of conversation around why there's impediments there. There is also limited capability to pay. So the question is, how do you price it to replace kerosene and chemicals? And that's what you're replacing, if you think of it from a competitive standpoint. So that's a huge challenge in terms of getting the pricing right. A lot of people figured this out. It is, the price of solar has dropped about 80% in the last decade. As it continues to fall, the ability improves in these various areas. The other challenge is there's very few business models that are scalable. Let me give you a stat in sub-Saharan Africa. There was, in 2013, $20 million of private equity / debt into this market. Last year, there was 200 million. Significant increase, but really not so much. And even our government came along with Power Africa and said, we're going to spend $7 billion. And you go, wow, that's a significant investment. And I would quick to say, not so much. Because Duke, our annual capital expenditures is roughly $7 billion a year. And that's just one company in the United States. So in the power sector, that's a challenge. The other challenge is the 1 billion people that are connected to the grid. I heard somebody say this in a really clever way. They call those the grid off people. They're connected to the grid, but the power's off.
Right.
And so that requires significant investments to improve the reliability. So I spent a lot of time focused on the solar ladder, from solar lanterns to home solar systems to microgrids and how that build out works, how you need to focus on irrigation, and you can bring solar to that. 50% of the people in low-income countries are farmers. And by the way, you go, wow, that's surprising. But if you look at the United States, if you go back to the 1800s, 50% of the people in this country were either farmers or working in ag. So they have huge challenges. I think that and we're on the way to solving it. We've got the technology, we need more capital, we need governments that are supporting, and we're beginning to develop models that scale. Imcopa Solar in Nairobi is probably the best. They build out to 450,000 homes. But that's just a drop in the bucket compared to what has to get done. And the message I would leave with you, everybody's chatting about this problem. Not many people are doing much about it. And we got to go to work. And if we go to work, then we'll bring the cost of solar further down, better business models, and at some point in the future, that can transform how we think about distributed generation in the US. Now, and I said I would do, just for one quick minute, I spent 25 years as a CEO, and I just simply want to say, because this is what we're going to primarily talk about, there's three things that drive how the power sector's developed in the United States. One is policy, primarily state policy, not federal, which has implications with respect to the role that President Trump can or cannot play in the future. The second thing is it's technology. Think about 10 years ago, we had almost zero wind and solar. Today, 8% of the electricity in this country comes from wind and solar. And if you look at all the ads that are made every year, people tend to think it's more, but not so much, because a kilowatt hour from a megawatt of renewables has a pretty low load factor. So that is only beginning to crank up. The third thing is customer preferences, but customers are not so much in this game. And what I mean by that is, the average bill in the United States is 1.3% of the disposable income. It's less than the cell phone bill, it is less than the cable bill. And so it is not a big issue. It is not front of mind for consumers. Now we can take a Steve Jobs approach. They don't really know what they want. Okay? We'll make it. and they'll love it. And actually, in a way, that's what policy people do. They tell customers that are getting at 1.3% disposable income, I'm going to tell you what you want, and this is it. So there's a tension there, and there's going to be a huge battle for the customer between incumbent utilities and new entrants, and that's a real tension that kind of plays out in the power sector. With that, let me stop.
This is great. And it is a lovely segue into talking a bit more about what's happening in our country right now when it comes to climate and energy policy. I'm sure everybody in this room knows that President Trump signed a very sweeping executive order last week to curb the federal government's efforts and role in addressing climate change, presumably to increase energy independence and also to protect coal industry jobs. I want us to really look at two components of that executive order and talk a little bit about what's the likely effects of those. And so the first one, and perhaps the most important one, is to repeal Obama's Clean Power Plan. That was designed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from existing power plants, and it was one of the major components in our contributions, our national contributions as the United States to the Paris Agreement, where we pledged to reduce our our CO2 emissions by greenhouse gas emissions by 26% by 2025 relative to 2005 levels. So clearly, there are conflicting opinions about how important and detrimental this repeal of the Clean Power Plan will be. Probably the most optimistic opinion came from Mayor Bloomberg in an editorial in the New York Times on Friday. But really, the opinions differ. And so maybe I could ask both of you to comment on what you see unfolding in that space as a result of this.
Well, actually, Jim gave the answer a few minutes ago when he said that, or he's a big part of the answer, when you said that energy policy in this country is more at the state level than the federal level. And that's true. I mean, most of the adoption of renewable energy in the US has been driven by state level policies, by the state level renewable portfolio standards and the markets for renewable energy credits at the state level. And the federal government has not been very heavily involved in this. I mean, it's been responsible for production tax credits and investment tax credits for renewable energy. Those were, I mean, the Obama administration agreed that those would be phased out by, I think, 2020. So they were going anyway. The sense was that renewable energy was competitive enough that it didn't need those anymore. And as far as I can see, there's no reason to suppose that the Trump administration will be able to encourage states to abolish the renewable portfolio standards. If anything, states at the moment are tightening up on those. Now, the Obama Clean Power Plan, which was an interesting plan in a lot of ways, was never actually implemented. As soon as it was promulgated, it was frozen by a court order, rather like Trump's orders banning and limiting immigration. And it's still frozen. So Trump is abolishing something which actually hasn't had any effect yet. It would have had an effect, presumably, but even without the Clean Power Plan, US emissions of CO2 have been falling much more than any of us expected, quite frankly. US emissions of CO2 have fallen for the last couple of years, partly as a result of the replacement of coal by gas. Gas is a lot cleaner than coal, and then more recently as a result of the replacement of gas and coal by wind and solar, which Jim was just alluding to. So I'm not, I wish that the Clean Power Plan stayed in place, obviously, but I don't think its abolition is a disaster. People in the energy field make long-term decisions. When Jim is building a power plant, he has to look, 40, 50 years ahead. So if you're building a power plant today and you're choosing whether it should be coal or whether it should be renewable, you've got to think about the whole sort of sweep from now till 2060. And it's very clear to anybody with half a brain, quite frankly, sometime between now and 2060, and probably sooner rather than later, the US will actually have policies at the federal level in these areas. And the fact that the next 4 years might be a bit of an exception would be very risky to build billion-dollar investments on that, I think.
Yeah, I really agree with how Geoff characterized it. Let me give you a couple stats so it kind of matches up perfectly and supports Geoff's point of view, which is mine. If you take the Clean Power Plan from 2005 to 2025, it was supposed to lead to about a 25-26% reduction in CO2 from the power sector. Let me give you a great stat, and it helps you sort of come to a conclusion about, are we losing anything if the Clean Power Plan never goes forward. Between 2005 and 15, the power sector reduced carbon emissions 21%. Think about that, 21%. There was no price on carbon, there was no regulation. What happened? Well, what happened is you're starting to see old coal plants being retired and replaced with gas plants. They're not doing it in the industry necessarily to solve carbon, although it's produced a significant reduction in carbon, but it's all about affordability. Gas is cheaper than coal, and you can dispatch gas first, and the new combined cycle plants are incredibly efficient. So that 21% by 15, I think the industry will blow by the Clean Power Plan by 2025, just based on the momentum that's moving through the industry today. So I take a lot of comfort in where the industry's going. Geoff's really right about, if you look at the country, 30 states, including the District of Columbia, have renewable portfolio standards. They will not change as a consequence of having President Trump. They stay the same. And that's what's really driving, and where we are today, as I mentioned earlier, 8% of the energy in this country comes from renewables. And that's significant compared to where it's been. It just slipped past hydro, which is 6%, but it's a long way from being a dominant source of electricity in the US, but it's clearly climbing pretty significantly. So I think the industry gets the fact that we need to decarbonize. The other thing we really understand in the industry, we know we can't do this overnight. The sooner we start, the better. The cheaper it'll be for our customers, because we can spread the cost out over a long period of time. And we didn't build this system in the last 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. We built it over the last 50 years. And so to make this transition, we need to start now. And the happy coincidence is that we have to retire and replace every plant except hydro by 2050. So we're on a road to retiring and replacing. Do we need a nudge from the government? Maybe. To maybe go further. And there is a question about whether gas will last. That's another conversation. But the important point is, I think the industry's on the way to achieving the Clean Power Plan, even if it doesn't still exist. I'm not arguing that it shouldn't. I mean, I'm going to be quick to say that. I think it's fine, and it should stay in place, because not every company is moving as aggressively, but the industry in aggregate is.
So a couple of weeks ago, the New York Times published a really interesting set of maps. And there's actually a new environmental editor at the New York Times, Hannah Fairfield. And one of the maps talked about, and this was data collected by the Yale Program on Climate Communications, very recent data. One of the maps talked about the approval, basically, of the Clean Power Plan across the country. And we don't have slides here, but if you just sort of see, there's a blob of orange down here. There's sort of different shades of orange. And orange means, and you don't see a single dot of blue in there. That means the color codes the approval in each congressional district of the Clean Power Plan, with blue being less than 50% and brown being above 50%. And you basically see across the country, every state, every district, every political affiliation, no matter who voted, basically wanted the Clean Power Plan to be in place. So what does that say about these opinion polls? Or our political system, or about the purported polarization of attitudes in this country regarding the environment and environmental protection?
I'd say a couple things. I mean, when we were in the middle of the Waxman-Markey debate back in 2009, we did a study of the United States, and we found that in 25 of the states, more than 50% of electricity came from coal. And there's historic reasons for that. Some due to, I have to go back to the 70s to really understand it, because we had passed a law that prohibited the building of gas plants. Because of 3 Mile Island, we weren't building any more nuclear plants. So the only plants we could really build in the industry to maintain reliability was coal. But think about politically trying to pass something in Congress where the cost impact would be significant, in states where more than 50% of the electricity came from coal. And if you look at that map, what's really significant is there's no longer 25 states with more than 50%. Today, there's only 10 states with more than 50%. And that reflects the conversion that's going on around the country. So the political capability to move is better. The other quick point is, where is the wind and solar? The wind is in Texas. Last time I looked, Texas was red. They'll probably be red tomorrow. I live in Texas, and I have a feeling they will be red for a long time. But my only point is, Kansas, red, Colorado, purple, Wyoming, red. So most of the wind resources in the country are in red states. Farmers get it, local merchants get it, people that are looking at the jobs that are increasing as a consequence get it. So at the ground floor, you see all the renewables being deployed. They're not being deployed in New York, is a high percent, some are, but they're being deployed in these red states where the wind blows and where the sun shines. And so that, over time, is going to change the political climate in the future.
Yeah, I think you've got to recognize the power of the fossil fuel lobby in the US. The US is actually, you might not think of it this time, the US is the biggest producer of oil in the world. It's the biggest producer of gas in the world. It is the second biggest producer of coal in the world. It has the largest coal reserves in the world. It dwarfs Saudi Arabia if you take its output of hydrocarbons in total. So when you think of a petrostate, you normally think of Qatar or Saudi Arabia or somewhere like that. You should think US. It really is the ultimate petrostate. And oil and gas industry has interesting property. You're producing oil from the ground at $15, $20 a barrel, and you're selling it at $50 to $100 a barrel. A lot of clean cash flow there, a lot of spare free cash flow. It gives them a lot of political influence. The oil and gas industry in the US has always been very, very politically influential. Now, to tackle climate change requires significantly downgrading the role of the oil and gas industry, and also significantly changing the automobile industry, by the way. The US automobile industry is built up around the internal combustion engine, and they're very attached to it. That's where all their intellectual property is, basically. The oil and gas industry and the oil industry were the backbone of the US economy in the 20th century. So those are two very difficult economies, very difficult industries to tackle. But you have to tackle those two industries if you're going to be really successful in dealing with climate change. So that's why I said earlier, it's a political problem rather than an economic problem or a technological problem. And those industries, many of you probably read the book The Merchants of Doubt, which is a fascinating book. It shows the ways in which these various industries have sort of undercover acted to influence public debate about climate change.
So the other thing the executive order of March 27 did was to remove the requirements of federal officials to consider the impact of climate change on any of their decisions. So essentially taking away the use of a shadow price for carbon, which sort of is trying to do the costing external effects of carbon, coal or fuel burning, which currently is at $36 a ton for CO2 emissions. So maybe you could comment what the effect of not using the shadow price will be, either for the federal government, but also, companies use it. They have a shadow price between $6 and $60 at the time. And so, how can it be that the federal government doesn't do it, companies do it? It seems a mess.
I think what the federal government does is all interesting, but then dictate what private companies use. And federal agencies, it might dictate decisions they make. But we've been running carbon scenarios for a long time. And if you keep running the carbon scenarios, at the end of the day, you default to a low carbon generation. That's how you pick renewables. That's how you, in part, how you pick gas and coal. So I think the fact that this goes away doesn't affect companies. I'm going to just say this. We purchase coal and gas by renewables. And actually the power sector has bought over 100% of all the wind in the country and about 80% of all the solar. So we're really the people that buy it, we're not the people that extract it. So we make the decision on what to use. So we have a lot of control over the fossil fuel industry just based on what we select. And we're not going to let, whether the government has a price or not, it's not going to preclude us from continuing to put a price on carbon.
It's not going to stop you then.
Not going to stop. I mean, it's inevitable that we're going to have to address climate change. It's inevitable. And you just can't build. Geoff said it best. You can't build 40-year plans without putting a price on carbon.
Geoff, I want to get you to reflect maybe a little bit on our history in this country on environmental protection. Sometimes it's good to zoom out a little bit, to get the bigger picture. And it turns out that two of our most poor environmental presidents actually were Republicans. Teddy Roosevelt started the national park system. Richard Nixon created the EPA in 1970. So what is there in that history to give us some hope?
Well, yeah, it's
Reincarnation.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, if you ask most environmental groups which presidents have the best environmental records, they are actually Teddy Roosevelt for his role in the national parks and Richard Nixon, who not only founded the Environmental Protection Agency in 1973, but also passed the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, which are the principal pieces of legislation being used to try to control greenhouse gas emissions, for example. He was also responsible for the Endangered Species Act. And it's quite an amazing burst of legislation was passed during the Nixon era. And it's interesting. I mean, there's actually no evidence that Nixon ever felt particularly strongly about the environment. He just thought it was politically advantageous to pass this sort of legislation. And by contrast, for example, the Clinton-Gore administration, which you might expect to have a strong environmental record, actually didn't. The next after Roosevelt and Nixon, I think the next is generally thought to be Lyndon Johnson. What does that tell us? It's difficult to know. I mean, I talk about this a little bit in my book, but the problem is the Republican Party has changed so much from the 1970s and 80s. And I moved to this country in the 1980s. And then the Republican Party was a sort of mildly conservative, business-oriented, kind of rather business-like, a non-ideological party. And that's what Nixon represented. And that's what Roosevelt represented too. Reagan and post, the party's been much more ideological. And part of that ideology is that the free market is always right. That was never part of Nixon's ideology. Certainly never part of Roosevelt's ideology. Roosevelt was heavily involved in trust busting, if you remember your economic history. So it's that developing that concept that the market is always right. Makes it very difficult to accept environmental problems as real because the environmental problems are generated by market failures. And market failures require some sort of government intervention. So there's a sort of a mental conflict there. I don't think we'll have a departure from the partisanship we have until there's something of an intellectual change in the conservative movement in this country. It becomes more traditional, more business-like, more like a kind of a European sort of Christian democratic movement, and less ideological. I'm not enough of an astute observer of US politics to see whether that's likely to happen or not. Maybe you guys have Jim.
No. I would add one other precedent to the list, and that's George H.W. Bush. He passed the Clean Air Act amendments.
Yeah.
But the most important thing he did with that, and by the way, it had huge implications with sulfur in the Northeast. But what he did, and this is the best environmental protection and using market forces, he created a cap and trade regime where you capped emissions and had it decline over time, and then you let the participants come up with a cheap way to comply. In stark contrast to command and control is the way we thought about it in the past. It's a more enlightened way to address these issues. And the only other point I'd make, nature is neither Republican or Democrat. And we need to think about it And we need to think about nature as people of the planet, not in a partisan way.
Actually, just picking up that point, the first use of cap and trade in the US was actually Reagan. We used it for phasing out lead in gasoline.
Right?
And there wasn't quite a big deal as the Clean Air Act amendments. So, Reagan was regarded as something of a saint by the conservative movement, but actually was totally in favour of cap and trade and market-based environmentalism.
Here in this discussion, I'm ready to run out and change my party affiliation to Republican.
Maybe we all should.
That's one way to change the party.
So I'm going to ask one more question, and we open it up to the audience. So let me actually start by asking the audience. We heard what a great deal we're getting on electricity bills from Jim. But how many of you actually would be willing or are willing to pay a little extra on your electricity bill to basically have green, sustainable energy from renewable sources? Okay, now how many of you who have so roughly 15 cents per kilowatt hour. So those of you who have your hands up, how many of you actually have done that? How many actually have? Okay, so it's about half. So I think this gets to the point of good intentions are not enough. And one simple solution to that, and it turns out this is like one of those non-partisan issues across the board. Sanford has done several surveys on this very recently. People want green electricity, they want renewable sources, and yet it's very difficult to do it. You have to go to some website, you get a lot of information that's completely unintelligible. You have to choose between those, then you're not quite sure whether you're going to get screwed, will they really provide things. So it turns out some utilities actually have switched to default. Right now the default is we're going to get brown electricity unless we take major action towards getting green. But why not make the one that everybody wants, the simple one? And if you don't want it because you can't afford it, Bruce is concerned.
Why?
You can opt out. Then Bruce will have to do the cumbersome thing, going to the website. So it turns out that utilities experiment with it, sort of have great responses. Why isn't it the norm? Why is it not the norm across the board?
No, that's a really good question. And I think part of this, there's two parts to the answer. One part is there's not enough green energy, okay? And only in the last 3 years have you seen the green energy grow to 8%. So you don't have anything to sell. Because the breakout last year, because I looked it up, I Googled it before I came in here, so I'd have a number. I'm not sure it's right, but it's kind of a number. It's a Google number. Okay, it's a disclaimer. 33% of electricity in the country was generated from natural gas last year. 32% from coal, and by the way, a decade before, 50% from coal. 19% from nuclear. 8% from renewables, 6% from hydro, and then there's a few other things that are hardly 1%. And so that is a dramatic change in the mix of the most capital-intensive industry in the country. So there's not enough to sell. The problem before that is, it was the price. And we actually, interesting is, we did a study of our customers because we wanted to present this to them. And we said, would you pay 5% more to have green energy with zero carbon? A lot of people said yes. And then we said 10% fewer. Then we said 15%, even fewer, hardly anybody. So affordability is something that's always been important, not just in the regulation of the power sector. I mean, that's been the number one. When you go, what's the purpose? Affordable, reliable, clean, and safe. Affordability has always been number one. And so it's only now are we getting enough green to be able to fulfill the promise where the price is affordable. So I think that idea is a good one. It will gain greater currency in the future, but probably never made sense in the past.
It doesn't have to be also 100% green. It could just be the optimal mix within your utility.
And we give them the optimal mix.
Yes. Let's get the questions from the audience. And one, please.
Hi there. I'm curious to know if there's kind of a cap on how much we can produce from renewables, given that the sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow. presume there has to be, at the moment we kind of use it on the margins, and kind of if the wind isn't blowing, presume you can top it up with fossil fuels or nuclear. Like, what is that limit? I mean, could you conceivably get to 100%, or is it kind of max out something?
I think there is a strong belief among many environmentalists that you can get to 100%. Now, one of the conditions of getting to 100% is have storage. And storage is becoming more cost effective every day. But I think Germany is having a problem with integrating it in, although they're doing it. But they can't move wind to the southern part of the country or the solar from the southern part to the northern part of the country. So you got to get the grid right to be able to move that power around. But I think that people have been able to get to 25 and 30% and make it work. So I think there's a capability. It's all about, we have the technology, we have to have the software. If we develop the software, we'll get closer. But you're always going to need a base load unit for when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. And you need to keep the system energized. You can't afford the system to go dark. And that's one of the reasons, I mean, California is a good place to study because they're seeing solar is eating solar on the peak and driving the prices down pretty dramatically, even for solar. Because there's so much solar on the peak and not enough in the shoulder months. And it falls off, so you almost need 2,000 megawatts to ramp in 5 minutes to cover the fall off in the solar. That's a technical problem. I think it can be fixed, but I think we have to have an open mind about it. We can't say no, we can't do it.
And storage is a big issue. I'm talking to James White of California. Most California utilities are now installing huge batteries that will store many megawatt hours. And basically, to do exactly what Jim was saying, which is take solar from the daytime and shift it to the evening peak. That was totally uneconomic even 2 or 3 years ago. The prices of batteries have been falling very dramatically. You must have heard Elon Musk going on about the cost of batteries. So that's an important bit of technology. The other thing you can do, though, is wind tends to blow at night, and the sun obviously tends to shine in the daytime. So you can correlate the two. And there's been quite a lot of studies of the extent to which you can, by sort of connecting different parts of the country and connecting solar and wind systems, actually manage to smooth out the output. You can do that quite a lot. And the evidence is you can probably get up to 50% penetration without huge problems. After that, you need to start investing very heavily in storage. And also, the other thing you can do is what's called demand-side management. So you can have, and quite a lot of utilities these days have interruptible contracts with some of their customers. And they give them a discount in exchange for being able to disconnect them or reduce their supplies and add a couple of hours notice for a maximum of a certain number of hours. Were you guys involved with those?
We did that, and it's time of use rates also. But here's what's got to happen. We got to convert the grid from an analog grid that provides electricity 99.99% of the time to a digital grid, which will produce it. It goes from unidirectional flow to multi-directional, it's a network. That in the industries that work at it, last year they spent $52 billion on the grid trying to transform it. And 60% of the meters in the country are smart meters today. So they're moving in the direction of having a grid that will facilitate more and more wind and solar.
Yeah. We have Con Edison as our supplier. Con Edison is our supplier. We put solar panels on our house. 400 homes in our small community and put solar panels on. So we share with Con Edison and the solar. I figured out that we reduced our energy costs this year by almost 15%. We store the sun, the panels store the sun, the heat, and in the wintertime we don't get as much use of the solar panel. We do get some of it because it was stored through the summertime. And our supervisor of our town is having a meeting to try and get additional people, traditional homes, you put solar panels on. And then not every house can have it. You have to face a certain direction. Trees can't block the sun. And we say something around 10 to 15, 20%.
That's terrific. And that's part of the trend of solar on the roof around the country. There's community solar where people don't have the perfect roofs for it, and they build a community solar project and they share it and dispatch it. And corporations, surprisingly, are building wind and solar and using it to supply for, I mean, Walmart is one, Google's another, that are building and buying that capacity, weaning themselves from the utility supply. Now, I would be quick to say, and this is just a partisan, a North Carolina point, you're not going to get that kind of savings down there because our prices are so low.
And we're losing Indian point.
Gentleman, right?
Yeah, so I'm very curious about the storage theory, because one of the first principles of electricity, if not the first, it cannot be stored. So apart from the low-scale batteries of the solar panels, how can you store huge quantities of electricity to solve the problems you're talking about? And if I may, I come from Spain. We've always been a world example for renewables, and they're stopped. Like, they don't enter the system anymore because of these problems, because we cannot control them. So how can the US or any other country fix this problem? So countries like Spain, with all the resources in the world, are not using it. How can any other country solve it? Thank you.
Well, let me just quickly say, I'm sorry, Jeff.
No, you're okay.
No, I'm just going to say I used to own wind in Spain, as well as micro hydro. And I'm really familiar with the situation there. But in the US, take Duke because I know it best, we have pumped hydro. We have 1,700 megawatts. Think about that. That at night our nuclear units pump it up into the mountains, and then we use it during the peak period of the day. So pumped hydro, compressed storage, or the big hunks of storage. The utility scale solar is coming, but is not yet cost effective.
Yeah, the US has about 32 separate pumped hydro storage stations, pumping water uphill at night and using it to generate hydropower during the daytime. And that's by far, worldwide, that's by far and away the most common way of storing energy today. And then there's also this compressed air energy storage where you basically take air and you compress it into an underground cavern, very, very high pressure. And you let it out when you need extra power and you have it blow a turbine. And those are the two kind of non-electrical ways of storing energy. And the batteries are just beginning to enter service right now. And there are batteries, the California utilities have batteries that will store a couple of 100 megawatt hours at this point. They won't store it for very long, but that's not crucial. I mean, it's basically, as Jim was saying, they just store it from daytime to the evening shoulder. So you're only looking for storage for 5, 6, 7, 8 hours max in those cases. And that's getting to be doable. One of the products that Musk is always emphasizing at Tesla are his Powerwall batteries. And he has Powerwall batteries for the home, and he has some other kind of battery with another name for utilities. I forget what he calls his utility scale batteries. But he's plugging this idea of batteries of utilities using electrical storage.
In offense, maybe we should move to the other side of the room.
Yeah.
For 1 second, yeah. Gentleman in blue.
Well, we have a microphone there, so I'll take a question and we'll work with it.
But you will be next. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Over the last 2 centuries, total pollution has grown hand in hand with population growth. Are you concerned over continued exponential population growth?
The population isn't actually growing exponentially at the moment. I mean, it's expected to level off at around about 9-point-something billion by mid-century. So it's growing, but there's the thought of having another 1.5 billion people on the Earth by the middle of the century is extremely challenging. No question about that. It makes every environmental problem you face and pretty much every other problem you face a lot more serious. The evidence is that education and prosperity reduce the birth rate quite significantly, but with a lag, unfortunately. So it wasn't, I mean, we've now got 7 point something billion, we'll probably get up to about 8.5 or 9 by the middle of the century. Most people, I think it's going to flatten off by then. It's not an actual
But once Jim gets all the electricity out the rest of the world, we'll have to see what happens.
Yes. We don't want the rest of the world to have as much electricity per capita as we do in the US, because that's outrageous. And we're going to bring that down.
Hi, thank you. My name is Zach. I'm class of 15 of the school. 2 questions kind of link the business decisions to the policies and to the market. The first question is, I think it's interesting to note from what I know, one of the Duke's peer, Nextera, has been very focused on clean energy and renewable energy in the last decades or so. And their share price and the return on shareholders has been growing tremendously over the last decades or so. So first question is, in your view, how much of that growth is driven by policies and how much of it is by business strategy or other factors? And my second question is kind of linked to some, I think the point you touched on just now, the external price or the externalities of the price for different generation sources. What do you think are some of the ways to translate that shadow pricing or whatever ways of pricing that, linking that market price to that kind of external price and using some of business commercial decisions rather than policies?
That's a short answers.
Okay, very short answer. Nextera has really taken advantage of the federal tax credit, which has shielded a lot of their income. So they take all the tax credit in the first year rather than normalizing their life asset. So it gives them huge growth, but puts them on a treadmill to say we have to deploy as much next year to get the same tax credit to shield that earnings. So they're really doing it off their earnings of their Florida assets.
So, let me make a quick comment about the second question you had there. I mean, there's a bunch of different ways of dealing with external costs. You can, the classic idea is put a tax on. So that's the idea of green taxes or carbon taxes or whatever. Cap and trade does the same, because a cap and trade requires you to buy a permit, which effectively raises the cost. So it's cap and trade is effectively a tax. You can give people the legal liability, and you can give, so if you impose an external cost on me, you can give me the right to sue you. That works in the US. The problem with the court system is so expensive and cumbersome and a bit unpredictable, but BP had to pay $18 billion as a result of the externalities caused by the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. So that does work eventually. There are other ways. I mean, consumer activism or investor activism are other ways of dealing with this. As a consumer, you can turn to a company and say, I don't want to buy your products because I disapprove of the environmental impact that your company has. And if enough environmental groups try to organize their members to do that, it has an impact. Or socially responsible investors can do much the same. They can say, I don't want to buy your shares because I don't like what you're doing. So those are ways of doing this without a government intervention, a more kind of private politics way of doing this. But they all eventually impose a cost as a result of the externalities.
All right. First of all, thank you guys, and this was awesome. One question, and this is more towards Jim. I hear the wind comes from Texas and Oklahoma and all the red states and all of that, but the EPA administrator is from Oklahoma, and he is a climate change denier and is advocating policies that are antithetical. And I'm guessing since you've been in this business for a long time, you've dealt with these people. Because it sounds like their policies are against the wind industries in their states, and obviously I'm not naive and there's oil and all of that, but how does this happen?
Yeah, that's really a good question. And let me quickly say, I'm not defending Pruitt. There is no question that will force me to defend him. But I'm a lawyer by training also. And I would quickly say his point of view, he's a strict constructionist. He believes that the EPA went way beyond their mandate under the Clean Air Act to regulate CO2. Because nobody was talking about CO2 when the Clean Air Act was passed and the provisions that they stuck this under. And let's not forget, because I was testified about 10 times on the Hill in 9 and 10 to pass a bill because we didn't think the EPA didn't have the authority to regulate carbon. We got it to the House but couldn't get it to the Senate. That was Waxman-Markey. So there was a broad belief, even by the EPA, they didn't have the authority. So there's a little kernel of truth in that argument. And so he comes at this saying, we'll regulate what the law says we should regulate, but we're not going to regulate based on what we believe should be regulated and the law doesn't provide for it. So that's the best defense I have for Pruitt. And let me quickly say, I am not defending him.
One more question, I guess.
From the data I heard before, it's like nuclear energy is about 19% in this country. And I have fear, since the Japanese focus and one is in Eastern European countries, the leaking things happened. So each time I passed it here in New York, Indian Point, I feel like scared something happened in this country because I heard that the discarded the waste and kept hardly can handle, and it's take 20,000 years, no dangerous for human beings or plants. But compared with the emission of coal and gas, I think nuclear things kind of for more dangerous things, and the result in the long time behind. So what do you think about this question?
Oh, that's a very good question. You know, I operated the second or third largest nuclear fleet in the country. And I sit on the board of IMPO, which regulated, is a product regulation of nuclear units in the US. And I saw every unit in the United States at least 3 or 4 times in my tenure. They did a deep review of all these companies and rated them on their safety and their reliability. The statistics say that nuclear is the safest way to generate electricity in the United States. When you compare it even to solar and to wind and gas and coal, less accidents per kilowatt hour. It is 19% of the carbon-free electricity in this country, or 19% of the electricity in the country, but 63% of the carbon-free electricity. And if you look at the situation in Germany, and I find it kind of short-sighted to shut down Indian Point, my view, but I get it. On the one hand, you keep Fitzpatrick on and you shut down Indian Point. It doesn't make total sense. But Germany made the decision. I'm pointing to you because you're from Germany. She did it. She did it. Blame her. No. She shut down she and the Green Party shut down the nuclear plants. And as they shut them down, they've been building more lignite coal plants. And so as a consequence, their actual emissions of CO2 are going up because they're closing down zero-emitting nuclear plants. Do you have a risk associated with spent fuel? And that's really your precise question. I personally don't think so. I actually believe that what the French do is the right thing. They recycle it. I've been to the recycling facility in France, and I've stood on top of 40 years of spent nuclear fuel in France, where 75% of electricity comes from nuclear. So I think you can do it in a safe way, and it's been done in a safe way in the United States. But you do have, and I'm quick to admit, there's an extraordinary risk. Look at Fukushima. Extraordinary things can happen. They're a low probability, but they can happen. So there's always that risk there. But I just have a belief that nuclear is part of the answer. Although I'm not as clear now about that as I was 3 or 4 years ago, when I look at the difficulty of building cost-effective new nuclear, specifically in the US and other parts around the world, I'm almost not clear. I think nuclear could really stand to have some externality. And Geoff, I'm looking at you, but I'm just simply saying that I think it's safe, and I think the risk is manageable. But let me leave the guy that wrote Gaia and Revenge of Gaia is a medical doctor from the UK, James Lovelock. I had brunch. He's 92 years old, cool guy. Looks like a country farmer, country gentleman. And I had lunch with him, and he said, "Here's the way you need to think about it," because he believes in nuclear. He said, "I would rather manage a nuclear plant and the possibilities from nuclear than try to manage the unpredictable outcomes of climate change." So if nuclear can reduce the risk of climate change from a risk management standpoint, that's a good trade.
Yeah, just to add a quick point, I mean, I think Jim is right that statistically speaking, nuclear is the safest source of power. Between 5,000 and 10,000 people are killed in coal mining accidents every year worldwide. Lots of people are injured in coal mining accidents. And according to the American Lung Association, 30,000 to 40,000 people die every year as a result of pollution from coal burning power plants in this country, and more in many other countries. In the US, I think nobody has ever died as a result of an accident in a nuclear power station, ever. Which is, we've been running 100 nuclear power stations now for like 50 years, which is actually quite a good record. I'm slightly prejudiced. First job I ever had was designing nuclear reactors. I spent a year sitting on top of a nuclear reactor and working on the design of the core of a reactor. So it's sort of, it's in my background. But the real issue with nuclear power today, I think, is actually cost. And I mentioned some costs earlier. I said that, power from coal is about 7 cents a kilowatt hour, gas 5 cents a kilowatt hour. Power from new nuclear today, I think it's probably fairly over 10 cents a kilowatt hour. And that just makes it uneconomic, unless you put quite a high price on coal, which we're not doing at the moment. It's clean, but it's expensive. And the current generation of power stations being built in the US are way over budget and way over timetable. So it looks as though the cost of the power from those may turn out to be even more than 12 cents a kilowatt hour.
And actually, the company that put fixed income contracts with Southern and SCANA, Westinghouse, just announced bankruptcy. So they don't know what the cost of those plants are going to be.
If it's a quick question, one final one. Yes.
Jim, would you consider running for the president?
The president of what?
Yes. Well, I think on that note we can.
Thank all of you. You were born where? Where were you born?
The South.
The South. Were you born near coal or no?
No, actually, I grew up in Kentucky.
Kentucky, right?
And you've heard me say this. There are 3 things you can do when you grow up in Kentucky: coal mine, moonshine, or get on down the line. And I got on down the line.
Geoff was born in Wales, right? And you weren't born too far from coal either.
That's right, I was born in coal.
It was great, And all one of you later say to me is, it was better than Colbert, right? Nothing's better than Colbert. We have two winners here for this drawing. I know, Cosis, you're excited about this. One is Joanne News. Is that here? And another one is Andre Spa. Thanks very much for coming here. And I don't know if there's anything left outside, but there are bars in New York City.